Welcome back to Verses and Visions, Creative Conversations. Today I've got something special for all of you. Are you crystal clear on what really drives you? Or maybe you feel pulled in different directions, struggling to focus on what matters most. I'm excited to invite you to a free webinar I'm hosting called Defining and Honoring Your Values. In this session, we'll deep dive into knowing and honoring your values is essential, not just for personal fulfillment, but for making empowered, aligned choices in your creative work. It's happening on November 13th, and you won't want to miss it. By the end of the webinar, you'll walk away with tools to clarify your core values, prioritize your goals, and build a foundation that keeps you grounded and focused. Head over to www.sageversepublishing.com to register. It's totally free. I can't wait to see you there and help you bring new clarity to your creative path. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast Verses and Visions. I'm your host, Cassidy Beck. Today, I'm delighted and excited to be welcoming Clint Allred. Welcome, Clint.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
To tell you a little bit more about Clint, he grew up in Bountiful, Utah. He's the oldest child of 5 kids. He served a religious 2-year mission in Mexico City for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He attended school at BYU, Weber State University, and University of Tennessee. He holds a master's degree in nurse anesthesia. He works for Anesthesia Associates of Boise as the chief CRNA. He lives in Meridian, Idaho, with his wife of 22 years and their 3 children. So again, Clint, welcome.
Thanks, Cassidy. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. Love the podcast.
Thank you. Clint is unlike our other guests, and I feel like I wanted to have an episode that we talk about leadership. Clint, can we start with the story about you?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know about this. Our boys are on the same soccer team, and I feel like we have shared several intense games from the sideline. There was one in particular that sticks out to me today, and it was last spring, the championship game in the Idaho Falls tournament. Do you know which one I'm talking about, Clint?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
To paint the picture, our boys had made it to the championship. Tell when momentum is building, and you can tell when like tides are about to shift. I love the sport. It's so fun to watch. Our boys were down, but you could feel that momentum. And it was clearly on our side, and it was just like, oh, it was so close. And Clint is a dad that knows soccer. He had looked up ahead of time because each tournament has like specific rules. He had looked up ahead of time and knew the amount of time that the regulation it said that it was supposed to be. And the refs called the game. It was earlier than regulation time. And our sideline erupted in fury. Clint, I feel like you have a calmness about you that surrounds you, even in the middle of that chaos. In this tournament, the fields are booked back to back. They called it, they celebrated, but we were like, but it's not over. It shouldn't be over. The team that had the field next was coming on the field, and we're like, but the game's not over. It was mass chaos. It was distancing. But there was like a serenity around you, even in the middle of this storm. Can you speak to that? And how do you think that is something that happens to you?
I'm grateful that's what was felt by you. That's definitely not what I was feeling on the inside in that moment. So, yeah, that game was a challenging game. And as upset as we all were, and we love the sport in our home. We love it. We love it. I have 2 boys that are on the team with Cassidy's son, and we just love the sport and everything about it. And as frustrating and as hard as that moment was to watch our boys sink onto the soccer pitch for them in that moment, not life-changing, but it was a sad time for them. They sunk on that pitch, knowing that there was still supposed to be time left in the game. I do think it was an opportunity after a couple minutes of angst to maybe learn something. And while it's youth soccer, definitely does not change anything for the rest of our lives. Maybe there was a lesson to be learned. So after a few minutes of frustration and hurt, you can turn the page and make it a learning opportunity. I'm glad there was some serenity that you felt, Cassidy, because
I feel like maybe
in the
after
moment
the
it wasn't that.
So with election season coming up, I know there's a lot of angst, shall we say, out there. And I feel like it's difficult for people to communicate with each other. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, both professionally and in your church, you're a leader. And I feel like you've dealt with conflicts a lot. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yep. I think that's fair to say. I think we all run into some situations where we have conflict right now. In my role at work, I get to deal with conflict on occasion. Absolutely.
Given your experience and helping people navigate life through conflicts, through interpersonal conflicts, what is advice that you have for people?
Oh boy, I think there's a few things, definitely. And I've learned some of these things because I've made mistakes on dealing with conflict. It's taken me some time to go over some things, but I think there's probably a couple things that really make sense and have worked for me. I'm definitely not perfect at it by any means. And oftentimes I leave some conflicts thinking, wow, I'm not sure that's how I thought it would go. But I think the first thing is preparation. You have to prepare and not just go into situations where you're going to wing it, or go into situations where you already have outlined in your mind exactly how it's going to go. If I can share a story that happens early on in my role within our anesthesia group, we have a chief anesthetist, and they work in that capacity for a few years, maybe 3 to 5 to 8 years. Early on, we had a meeting with someone that was going to be a tough meeting. And so I set the meeting, and we had the rest of our HR team, and we set the meeting for Monday morning. And I reached out to this person on Friday and did, in an attempt to not want to ruin their weekend, I left it as, hey, we're just going to meet Monday morning. We want to talk about a couple things, and just left it very vague. Monday morning came around, and we went and had the meeting, and this person was very caught off guard. And it became a very emotionally charged meeting where there were some feelings hurt, and it definitely did not go the way that I had intended or wanted it to go. Since then, I've learned that allowing someone to prepare for a difficult conversation on both sides is so important. Not only the person maybe initiating the difficult conversation, but also for the person who's going to be the recipient. They need a chance to understand what they're coming to talk about. They can work through things emotionally and formulate their plan and their view and how they saw things. So I think preparation is incredibly important on both sides. The other thing I would say is knowing the person that you're talking to, getting to know them a little bit. I've learned in difficult situation, conflict resolution, there are always two sides to a story. Sometimes we get a narrative in our head and we think, okay, I know exactly what happened. I can see what happened. I know this person, but there's always two sides, and allowing that person to share their side of the story or their side of the situation really helps. We've talked about our boys, Cassidy. I have twin boys, and they are about as different as can be. True to form with teenage boys, they don't always open up and readily share. And sometimes there are things that we have to talk about as parents. We still have to parent these boys. And I've learned that with one of my sons, it's really hard for him to open up and to share emotions and feelings and frustrations. But if we can go outside and play basketball, or if we can go stand in the street for 10 minutes and throw a football back and forth, I can get him to share and to open up a little bit. And it's not emotionally charged, and it's not a hurtful situation. And I can say things pretty bluntly that normally I wouldn't be able to, and it would spiral. But knowing that person and allowing them to prepare and be able to talk things through can put us on our best foot moving forward with what we ultimately want, which is a resolution from those difficult conversations.
I really like your idea of knowing the person that you're talking to. And I feel like that is something that takes time. I'm curious because you had said to prepare. Have you ever been in a situation where you're totally unprepared and yet here it comes and you're like, oh, shoot, okay, this where we're okay. How do you handle that?
Absolutely, I've had that happen. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a situation that I went into thinking one thing again and totally out of left field got hit with something else. And you sit there for a minute and you think, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what to say or which direction to go in. And I think it's always okay to take a minute and to be upfront and honest and say, wow, I was not prepared to talk about this. I'm going to need some time to think about it. And maybe you need some time to think about it as well. I think that's always okay. I think also in those situations, Cassidy, if I can just be very honest and open,
Please.
I always rely on the power of prayer. And I go into a lot of situations each and every day praying about them. You mess up, and sometimes you need to go back and restate and maybe have a follow-up meeting. But I think if you're trying to do the best you can and you're putting forth that effort, usually you can leave on pretty good terms, letting that person know at least you care about them. Maybe you don't agree with the situation, or maybe you don't agree with what's been said, or maybe there needs to be follow-up and there are consequences. But if that person can leave knowing you care about them, then you probably have a fighting chance moving forward.
It's like one of the things that I hear you saying is like preparation is really important before or if you're going into a difficult conversation to prepare for it. But one of the things I hear you saying is like preparation for the things that we don't know about looks a little bit different. And that's like putting your spiritual work into it. It's prayer and like taking time and feeding your soul.
Absolutely. You have to make sure that you are comfortable with where you're at, comfortable with your strengths and your weaknesses, and working on them. And I will say, I think effort goes a long way. It sounds so simple, but I've found and seen a lot of times I get a chance right now at this moment to be a leader in certain situations. And there's no formal training for that. My work training is in anesthesia, not HR by any means. In church leadership opportunities and roles, there's no formal training other than just learning and trying your best and maybe years of mistakes and improvement and then mistakes again. But effort goes a long ways, just showing up, just being there, putting forth the effort. I've learned that a lot of times the outcome may not be perfect. In fact, it's far from perfect, but the effort can be close to perfect. You can put forth the effort. And as long as you're doing that, preparing yourself personally, then showing up and putting forth the effort, usually things turn out.
What leadership capacities are you in right now?
I get to be the bishop of our religious congregation. By no means am I a formal representative or spokesperson of the Church of Jesus Christ, but I am a representative in the way that I try to live my life. And for a few years, I get to have the role as bishop in our congregation of 300 to 400 people.
That is significant. And then professionally, as the chief anesthetist, how many people are you leading in that role as well?
We have an entire leadership team, but we have about 110 nurse anesthetists in our group at this time.
That leads us to my next question. I love talking about imposter syndrome, and Clint and I have been texting each other back and forth. You brought something that had never been presented before, and so I really want to talk about that. Before we do, I promised that I would give a disclaimer, and that is that neither of us are official spokesperson for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is our take, this is our experience, and this is how we view things. In no way are we subject matter experts, but as I like to say, that does not ever stop me from having an opinion. What is your experience with imposterism or imposter syndrome?
That title of imposter syndrome is something that's fairly new to me. I've definitely felt it before. That feeling of, man, am I up for this? Am I capable of this? Am I able to do it? And again, it's probably never perfect. Being okay with that is a huge step in being able to say that because you want to be, right? I care a lot about these people, both at work and at church. I care a lot about them. I care about them more than I realized I could. Being bishop opens your eyes up to a couple of things. Your love for people is so different than what I recognized or realized. So I care about these people. I want to be perfect for them. I want it to be great for them. And that's daunting. And you think, I'm not up for that. I don't know how to do that. And I do have the opportunity of speaking with people in their roles in the church. And I see that a lot. The great news is what we can do, we can prepare and put forth effort. And that's what it comes down to. And the rest seems to be made up. There's a lot of imperfect people doing a lot of incredible things. And that's across the board. And while, yes, I've seen imposter syndrome, I felt it myself, it's something that probably is motivating in some ways. It causes you to humble yourself a little bit and to maybe lean on someone else.
I love what you said, that there are a lot of imperfect people doing incredible things. My question for you is, in your role as bishop, and one of your responsibility is to extend volunteer or callings to people, which are volunteer. You're asking people to volunteer, and sometimes for quite a big commitment. Have you seen this show up in other people?
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's just go back. How great is it that we have so many people who are willing to volunteer and give of their time in whatever capacity it is? It's really a neat thing to see. And it speaks volumes to the lives of these people and how they're leading their lives. That at any given moment, I can go to someone's home, I can ask them to volunteer in a certain role and capacity, and leave with them saying, yes, I'll do it, no matter what it is. And we have all kinds of teachers and instructors and leaders, men and women. We even have youth that are leading other youth, which is just so neat. So, yes, I absolutely see it. And my advice to them is give it your all, give it your effort, because without fail, it doesn't last forever. This volunteer opportunity is for a short period of time, whether it's 5 years or whether it's 1 year or whether it's 6 months. It's wonderful. You end up getting out of it whatever you put into it. So give it your all, enjoy it. Although those feelings of trepidation and worry are not from our Heavenly Father. They're from someone else who wants us to doubt and to fear and to shrink. And we have the opportunity to grow and to give.
What I hear you saying is why I feel like this is so important to me. I feel like those ideas of who am I to do this and like those kind of insecurities, I don't feel like those are accidental. I think it is something that is a powerful tool that is used to belittle us. And that is why I like talking about it so much, because I think it's an important thing to have tools to fight back with. That being said, one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is that imposter syndrome in a church setting might be different than it would be in a professional setting. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a difference between a leader at work and a leader at church, although a lot of times it feels similar. Some of the same issues arise. We have a council that we work together in church, and we also have a leadership team at work. And I see a lot of overlap between those two, I'll be honest with you. And I'm grateful for that. The biggest difference, there's not a vote at either place. There's not campaigning. There's a hierarchy, but it's not like level by level where you climb the ladder. It's an opportunity to volunteer and to serve in a role. You're given that opportunity by someone who has priesthood keys at church, and you're set apart to do that through priesthood power. And that makes a huge difference. It makes a really big difference. So while the imposter syndrome is real, and we've all felt it at times, and I think you're right, it is meant as a tool to belittle or demean us or pull us back. Once you know that you're working with a different power, it's just amazing the difference you can feel.
Let me ask you a question, Clint, about your leadership. So I feel like as a leader, it might just be easier to be like, this is what I decided and go forward, just with your opinion. I also feel the community getting input slows the process down, but I feel like it's really important to seek other people's input and to seek other people's inspiration and guidance. Can you speak to that?
Oh, we could probably do a whole podcast session just on that. At times it does slow it down. And at times there is a need for a decision. But on the whole, most things, if you gather input from other leaders, it goes so much better. I have experienced this within my church role right now, especially. We have what's called a council, and we sit together, and that council has different people on it, different ages. It has men, it has women, it has people who are serving and leading over young kids, it has people who are serving over teenage kids, serving as leaders over adults. So many different points of view and leaders that are representing different groups. And when that group comes together, we have a decision to make. Without fail, the input from that council, we end up coming to a unanimous decision, one that we all feel good about. And maybe it's one that, for me, example, maybe I come with an idea in my mind of how I want things to go and where I want them to be. And then I hear something else from someone that really clicks or resonates. And I notice around the room, everybody else is nodding their head like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And we can go in that direction. We feel good about going in that direction. At times, does it slow things down? Absolutely. But it's worth it. It's always worth it. I always appreciated that input from we have other leaders within our congregation, and they're inspired as well. They've been asked to serve in that role through the same process that I have been as bishop. And so their input is so important. And I've never regretted ever listening to that counsel.
Is that a hard thing? If you go in, you're deciding on whatever it is, and you come in with an idea, because you talked about preparation. And so you may have an idea of how you think things are going to go. Is it difficult for you to have that idea change and evolve as you are receiving input?
I think it probably was at the start, right? And that's maybe part of the imposter syndrome. Maybe you're insecure with how you're feeling. So you think, okay, this is what we need to do. And otherwise, I don't look like a strong leader, or I'm not someone that people can rely on. But I don't feel that way at all anymore. I think it's okay to set maybe the boundaries and the parameters. These are the things that we need to discuss. And this is what needs to occur. But how do we get there? How do we get to this? This is the goal. And maybe that's where I have the opportunity to set the parameters and say, this is the end result. Now, what do we do? What are the steps to get there? And that's really where that council can lean in and say, from my perspective or my experience or the people that I'm leading, this would work. And then we have another perspective, and we see how those can unite and be synergistic together so that we get to this place. But maybe it's the process of getting there that is incredible when you get like-minded people who are working towards a common goal together.
One of the things I like to think about is we have in our church, like the bigger organization, we have our 12, like in the very highest leadership. I think about what their meetings look like. This would be like our prophet and our 12 apostles. And I can't ever imagine in that meeting how conflict, what to do with interpersonal conflict. And I think it would be so fun. And this is purely speculation because I've never been to one of these meetings. I feel like it would be so interesting to be a fly on the wall. I imagine all these apostles coming together. They probably do have their own ideas, but I could never imagine them belittling each other or putting each other down. Neither of us really know. How do you think a meeting like that would differ from one of your leadership meetings, like a professional leadership meeting?
Um, yeah, so you've described the setting very well, Cassidy. I think you're exactly right. Those leaders are dealing with worldwide issues, and they're all incredible leaders. They've done incredible things and have experience, and then they have that heavenly help as well. I'm sure they've come in probably with 12 different opinions and views and perspectives, but they always leave united. And I think that speaks volumes to what kind of people they are and how we can model things. I do think it's a little different in the professional setting.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the goals aren't the same as you meet with other leaders. We have a great leadership team. We have our HR team, and each of our hospital sites and each of our anesthesia teams has a representative. Getting everybody to share the same goal is a lot more difficult because they're representing a team or a group of people that might have very different goals from another team. And so coming together to set a goal and then saying, how do we get there? It takes work. And I admire the people who are able to do it, who are able to represent their team and then also step back and say, okay, but I need the group to succeed. Sometimes it works out really well, and sometimes it doesn't as much. And sometimes there is some contention and friction. In the end, we try to do what's best for the entire group, but it is a different setting and a different situation. Probably a lot to do with that heavenly help as well. Not that it's not there in professional settings. We know that succeeding professionally is important, but there are some differences.
Oh, for sure. Comparing those two is because there were stark differences. Was talking about councils and how the 12 apostles won't settle on a matter until it is all totally unanimous. They will wait and take as long as it takes, and they will respectfully listen to everyone. Just thinking about how different it would look in our own leadership professionally and in our leadership church settings if we set up meetings like that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And again, Cassidy, I'm like you. I've never been in any of those councils, but I think we are in such a reactionary world
Mm.
where we react and we take things so personal, and there's some tough things out there
Mm.
in the world. There are some really negative influences, and you don't have to read very far down in the comment section before you get into some pretty rough things. It's so reactionary. I think it's actually a really great point that you bring up, that the chance to take a step back and to think about things and to ponder and to just take a minute and not relax, but maybe remove yourself from the emotionally charged conversation. We're talking about interpersonal conflict, right? Sometimes when my feelings are hurt, the first thing I want to do is I want to react, and it's usually an emotional reaction. And whenever I've done that, I've always regretted it. I always end up thinking, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I wouldn't have said that. The more I can just pump the brakes and wait for a minute, take a step back, maybe reschedule a follow-up meeting, then you can come in and you can have measured thoughts and maybe a little bit more of a tempered response.
I really like those points. One thing I was wondering, in your leadership, both professionally and through the church, you talked about people representing their own group. Do you feel like it is difficult for people because they have this lens of these are the people that I need to protect or advocate for, but then how that fits into the greater good? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we see it all the time. And I think we all do it. I do it as well. When I was representing one group, I felt like I need to go to battle for this group, and this is what they need. And that's what they're counting on me for. And that's okay too. But I really admire, and I've learned from some really great people on the professional side who are able to say their piece for their group and then take a step back and look at it for the bigger overarching group as well. I think another thing that is really valuable is coming with your group, you're trying to represent them, and solutions to any problems that come up. It's really easy to come up with all the problems and see all the negative. But can you come up with the solution? What's your proposal, and how can you help support them and then be able to step back and look at the overarching group. I've learned from some great people who have been able to do that. I watch it happen and I admire them. It's something I'm trying to work on myself. It sounds so simple to be a problem solver, not just a problem finder.
So my dad was an incredible leader. And one of his rules was, you're absolutely right. It is really easy to nitpick and be like, that's not going to work. His rule was, you can do that as long as you have a different idea. But if you're just taking someone apart, that's not helpful. So it was, okay, what's your better idea? I think that was a valuable rule. As we were talking about advocating for your groups, that I was thinking about is, as parents, I want to advocate so strongly for my kids. They're so important. But I also have to realize, as strongly as I feel about my kids, I know you feel the same about yours, and everyone else feels the same about theirs. So to advocate for your kids, but then step back a little bit, is that something that you found challenging?
Yes, yes, definitely a hands-on helicopter parent that wants to plow the way and make everything okay for my kids, for sure. Yes, I think it's really important. We're in the middle in our home of teenage life. Our three kids are all in those teenage years, and they are incredible. And I'm not just saying my kids, but the teenagers, the youth in the world right now, they are incredible and they can do incredible things. Sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes you see what you feel are injustices happening. I'll go back to our soccer game at the start, right? Those kids are resilient,
Yeah.
and they are strong. And if you give them the right tools, hopefully, we're as parents, we're laying the foundation and giving them the right tools, they can navigate it and they can do things that, quite frankly, I feel like are impossible and that I could not do at their age. I work with an incredible HR team. I just represent the group of anesthetists, right? And
Yeah.
so I sit in awe in some of those HR meetings and some conflicts that come up, just amazed at some of the people that are able to navigate hard situations. And I wish it could end like the soccer team does when they're all hugging each other and they're frustrated. And I've never tried to do that at the end of an HR meeting. But in my mind, I think I know what those 14-year-old boys would do right now when they're frustrated, and they would rally and be there for each other. As a parent, um, these youth are resilient and powerful and good. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about these things. And I would end by saying there are a lot of imperfect people doing incredible things. And I'm so grateful to see that both in a professional setting and a religious setting. I sit back and watch people that I have the opportunity to get to lead right now, and I learn so much from them because they do great things. And in a world that I think sometimes we see a lot of the bad and the negative, it's tenfold on the other side. They're just people who are humble, who are doing their best, who are loving and serving one another. And I see it professionally and at church. It's not just a church or a religious thing. There are great people everywhere who are trying to do their best. It's a really humbling thing to have that 30,000-foot view and a front row seat at the same time to seeing those things.
So I just want to reiterate a couple things. I love that we're surrounded by imperfect people doing incredible things. And I can't remember where this question came from, but someone had asked me where there's like a person that is like driving you crazy. If you are thinking, okay, but what if they are doing the best that they can? They're an imperfect person doing the best that they can. If you approach it like that, what does it change about the situation? I think keeping those things in mind, that we are imperfect people and our hope is to do incredible things. We did a service project. We were harvesting apples. We went to an incredibly large apple orchard. As we were driving there, I was like, I wonder how this is going to be, because this isn't kids in their natural element, right? I feel like it's not. I guess this speaks to my shortcomings as a mom, but my kid's natural element is in front of some electronic device. We're working on it, but it's still how it is. Anyway, this isn't necessarily how they're going to be in their natural element. How is this going to work? And I was astounded of how many apples we were able to pick, and what a difference we were able to make. It was a short amount of time. I looked around and was inspired by the kids that I get to be surrounded by and that I get to work with. Let's hear your story, Clint.
I do have a story that I'll share with you.
Okay.
But I loved what you said before about people recognizing that very few people try to do things maliciously or in a hurtful way.
Mm-hmm.
Even when professionally we have to have a difficult conversation with somebody because something has come up, usually their motive behind it, there is something good behind it. Maybe they saw something they felt needed to be corrected and they handled it poorly and maybe created contention with another team member or another professional colleague. But in the end, their actual motivation was to fix a problem or to help a patient. And if you can look at that, see the good in the person, why this occurred. And it was actually good intent. Now let's work on how we handled it and we can massage that piece. I just got to be part of a service project with the group of youth from our church. And it was on a Saturday morning, this past Saturday, 7:30 in the morning. So it was still dark outside even. And it was a colder day. And it was following a school dance. We have this big group of youth in our congregation. And by big, we have probably 45 or 50. It was cold, dark, Saturday morning after a late night. And I thought, we're not going to have very many people show up. We were running just a little bit behind. We were probably one of the last ones to get there. And we showed up and I couldn't believe it. 30 kids there.
Wow. Wow.
30. And then right behind them, this is the effort part. Right behind them were another probably 7 to 10 adult leaders there as well. And I just thought, well, what am I even worried about? Why do I even worry about these things? The youth are incredible. And showing up on a dark, cold, early morning on a Saturday, I didn't hear any complaining. I'm sure there were some at home that didn't want to go, but I didn't hear any of it. And I just watched them and showed up late and was just in awe at who was there. We spent time in the orchards.
Any last words?
No, thank you, Cassidy. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate the opportunity to do some introspection as well. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your wisdom, and thank you for coming. Tune in next week, and we'll have another wonderful guest.